It seems any franchise we like with the right direction could make a good video game. Well, maybe something more action or mystery oriented, but for franchises I like, I always wonder how fun they would be if we had a fighting game centered around them. So in this video, I'm going to think of our favorite franchises that I think should get a fighting game with the help from Negative X and his poor sound quality.
Hello?
This will be easy. I'm sure we'll think of the right franchises pretty quickly.
Yeah, like Archer, the...
Yeah, but if we do that idea, we won't have room for my He-Man fighting game idea. It will be like Soul Calibur, but with He-Man.
Okay, well if we add that one in, and then we can knock out something like the Supernatural fighting game I was thinking of.
Yeah, but if we're gonna do that, I would rather just go back to my Disney Princess fighting game idea. Or just Ladies of Disney, because we have to have Mulan in there. She actually knows martial arts. Or Elsa, who can just be Sub-Zero.
Okay, what if we had like an actual scientist one though? Like you have Charles Darwin that can turn into animals, and you have Gregor Mendel who throws peas at people.
Okay, this is taking too long. How about instead we look at franchises that we like that already have their own fighting game that we would like to see done better and brought into the modern gaming era. While not every fighting game on this list will be horrible, we're looking at ones that have notable flaws and at the very least are mediocre when you break them down. Nothing like saying we want a modern X-Men fighting game when Capcom already made a solid fighting game in the 90s, albeit some flaws. That being said, I actually had fun with a few of the ones on this list, so it's all in the eye of the beholder.
I agree. I'm glad it only took us 7 months to come up with this.
So let's start. It's our top 10 licensed fighting games that should be remade.
Number 10 is the Transformers fighting games. Now there are a lot of these different fighting games. We just like to see any of them remade into something better.
All of them are either obscure and not worth searching for, or lackluster. Transformers Beast Wars Transmetals was a prominent one, since it was an N64 game that was only available at Blockbuster Video. Yup, when Blockbuster was at the peak of VHS and video game rentals, they received loads of partnerships. You were not missing much here if all the other local gamers kept beating you to the store, or you missed out on later retail releases, since it was your standard mediocre fighting game. Clunky and weird game mechanics. I can't really imagine what it's like for a fighter to become a car. I only recall one playable car in a fighting game and it was a joke character.
Well, in Beast Wars you couldn't turn into a truck. It was only animals. Optimus Prime was a gorilla.
Well, I missed out.
So, it was pretty cool. That was the one I grew up on.
I guess I meant more in general for a Transformers fighting game since I really just know the vehicle ones.
And it wasn't until Michael Bay's movie that I actually realized that the Transformers transformed into cars, and not various animals and dinosaurs.
I feel I should be somewhat disappointed in you.
I somewhat disappoint myself, too.
Number 9. Sonic the Fighters, as it was known on consoles. While the arcade version was known as Sonic Championship, the console name was somewhat uncreative. Aren't all of these characters fighters in every other game they appear in? Fighting enemies? What is it called when they defeat enemies in those games?
I'm pretty sure they just had strategic falling down.
Sonic the Fighters was based off another successful Sega franchise, Virtua Fighter. However, the game was simplified from Virtua Fighter and added a lot of rings, which functions like blood in Mortal Kombat. The game was alright, but it really was just a lesser Virtua Fighter in the end, with characters that have shorter limbs. The game had the right idea, but it needs some variety to the characters' movesets and some smoother animation. Sonic the franchise has enough characters for a good diverse roster in a fighting game no matter the style. Sonic can use his Smash Bros moveset and be Rushdown, Tails can utilize air control like Painwheel from Skullgirls, Knuckles can be a grappler or boxing character, Amy can hit you with a hammer like... well, I guess that's unique, and Honey the Cat can play like Honey the Human from Fighting Vipers, also by Sega. Since Sega decided if Fighting Vipers was not going to take off, they might as well take Honey and turn her into a cat so she can live on.
Now number 8 is the Simpsons Wrestling, the Simpsons fighting game. And suffice it to say, The Simpsons didn't translate into wrestling nearly as well as they did into Crazy Taxi.
This game was just too clunky to enjoy and somewhat broken. Not even the Simpsons references could save it. It also had an infamously broken character in Ned Flanders, who may have been a weaker character based on normal damage, but he had strong special moves and gets a full health bar back when pinned down for the first time. So you have to defeat him twice in one round just to win that one round.
That sounds kinda like Shao Kahn, but in multiplayer. That would be rough.
Howdily doodly, Earthrealm Marinos. I'm not as interested in a Simpsons wrestling game as I am in a 2D traditional fighter with the Simpsons, based on how well they made a beat-em-up game when they were not as well known yet.
Definitely, the 2 dimensions would increase the speed of the gameplay, and then every character would have really specific powers. Like Marge could have a special where she hits you with her cars, then she hits Homer at the beginning of every episode.
And Homer needs to throw Carbon Rod Hadokens, or just make that heroic Carbon Rod a playable character.
Or Maggie could have a move where she shoots you with a gun.
Whoa, people have only had about 20 years to see that episode. Put up a spoiler alert. Number 7. Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion. This was a Smash Bros. Style fighting game with Cartoon Network original characters from the 90s and 2000s, with Space Ghost Coast to Coast as the announcer. Sounds great on paper, but the game felt slow. These are cartoons, yet they move like they just woke up on a Monday. Also, the stages were a bit underwhelming. I'd like to see more backgrounds from the shows at hand. The last notable issue was the variety. For the characters we did have, some of the voice actors didn't return, and other series were not represented, including series that were newer and still running at the time of the game's release.
Now, the fixes for this could be pretty simple. Add some of the new modern characters and increase the gameplay speed. If I can't fight somebody as Lumpy Space Princess, I don't want to play your game.
Well, there's more you'd have to do with some other 90s and 2000s franchises, plus the mechanics would need a lot more tweaks like...
Nope. Only Lumpy Space Princess. That's all you need.
In addition, they added Captain Planet as a guest character in the console version, since Turner owns both Captain Planet and Cartoon Network, so why not? This is the best guest character in a fighting game ever. Forget Link in Soul Calibur 2. And then not really, Link was too awesome in that game.
Captain Planet would have been another great fighting game to have. You'd have the power of love versus the power of water. Who really reigns supreme? Number 6 is Digimon Rumple. Now I know what you're thinking. How could something with Digimon be bad? Well, this game found a way.
Whoa, hold on. We just like how that introduction sounded. This game was not too bad and had some sequels. It was middle of the road where it had good groundwork for a fighting game that utilized a large 2D arena, but it felt like it would have either been better in a more closed-off stage like an Omega stage in Smash Bros, or moved to a 3D plane. It's probably not a fair comparison, but I want to see Digimon get a game like Pokken, because Pokken dealt well with having a mix of characters that were bipedal, quadrupedal, and everything in between like Digimon has, all fighting on the same field.
This is how I'd imagine it. You'd have a 3-round fighting game. You'd start with the first level of the Digimon level for the first round. Second round, you go to the next level. Third round, you go to the next level.
Huh, that's a unique concept. So you would have 3 different rounds with 3 different fighters. While I do like the concept, maybe we should have it more like King of Fighters, where you have a team of 3 and they all start off in their rookie or lowest form, and then they upgrade their form every time they lose a health bar? Needs work, but maybe we're onto something. Maybe. Number 5. Sailor Moon. Sailor Moon actually had a few fighting games that built off each other with each new release, but they were all exclusive to Japan, which is why they're relatively unknown. No Sailor Moon fighting game was made past the 90s, and none of them were highly regarded. They were not smooth, but not all of them were that bad. They had the standard melee moves, special moves that were mostly projectile-based, and the occasional weapon. The games had the right idea, but they would have benefited from some Capcom or SNK sprite work and a better engine. Another thing that was weird was the roster only consisted of Sailor Guardian characters, so it was basically Team Training, the exhibition fighting game. There are at least a quartet of villains and a main villain every season, so there's the rest of your roster, also Tuxedo Mask. To bring a Sailor Moon fighting game to the modern era, I almost think Arc System Works should make it so it can be a full-on anime fighter. With the recent Sailor Moon Crystal, maybe it's time for Moon Spiral Heart Attack to become a cinematic super move.
Number 4 is Star Wars Masters of Terras Kasai. Terras Kasai?
This game had similar problems to other games discussed. Stiff, slow, whatever you want to call it, but it had the name Star Wars on it, so it was instantly appealing. It was a 3D weapon-based fighting game, so it was like a lesser Soul Calibur. Coincidentally, if you want to improve this game, you should just make it Soul Calibur. Give it to Namco and just use Soul Calibur 4 as an example. Darth Vader was fun in that game and Yoda was broken, but since using lightsabers are basically like sword fighting, you can make it work. Cervantes uses a gun, Han Solo uses a gun, just do Soul Calibur, full Star Wars edition, since the 3D plane was a good idea for this game. And even though this game was made in 1997 when we only had 3 Star Wars movies, which is not a bad thing, there were still endless roster possibilities for Terras Kasai.
Star Wars just has such good potential to be a great fighting game based on all the characters that it has. Great characters like Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Chewbacca.
I've heard of all of those characters and am glad they're on the roster, with other classics like Johto Cast, Mara Jade, and Hor.
I know none of those characters.
I'm a fan of giving lesser-known characters spotlight in a fighting game, but with a roster of only 12 unique characters, I feel more movie characters should have been included. If they wanted some obscure characters, I would have started with some lesser-known movie characters, but that's just me. Maybe Greedo or someone. He can not shoot a gun for an attack.
Like IG-88, the assassin droid, best known for a scene where he's standing next to Boba Fett when they're sending out assassins to track down Han Solo.
Huh. Maybe the expanded universe characters were a good idea, since I cannot tell if you're making up characters right now.
No, he definitely stood in front of Darth Vader that one time.
Number 3. Yu Yu Hakusho Dark Tournament for the PS2. I had fun with this game when it first came out, and it did receive some good reviews from fans. It was a fun 3D tournament fighter, but looking into it, there were some flaws. Mainly in the clunkiness of certain attacks, and the tag system was slow at times. This was the only Yu Yu Hakusho fighting game released in the US. This game was a step in the right direction, but it was followed by nothing for international audiences. However, there were plenty of Yu Yu Hakusho fighting games released only in Japan before and after this one, so more Yu Yu Hakusho fighting games just need to be released worldwide. The Japan-only titles Yu Yu Hakusho Forever and Yu Yu Hakusho Shitao, if I pronounced that correctly, would be a good basis for the next game solely by observation. The reason being, these games were developed by Dimps, who have been involved with games like Street Fighter and the DBZ fighting games. They knew what they were doing with these titles, and it's a shame they did not get much international exposure. And even though I'm talking about how the next Yu Yu Hakusho fighting game would look, that's just a dream at this point. At least the game we got worldwide had a great roster of every team member that had a notable fight during the Dark Tournament arc in the anime. Even Dr. Ichigaki, whose only fight was, "Hey look, I'm a scary monster man now." What, there's only 5 minutes left in the episode? Oh no, I've been defeated. Also Makintaro, whose fight was even shorter. You might as well just give me that bat demon from Genkai's Forest in the next game. And yes, I know he was called Baldock.
Number 2 is Godzilla, Destroy All Monsters Melee. Now, this game isn't bad per se, it just has areas that need improvement. For example, Godzilla can't hit somebody with a left hook, and he doesn't have a 100-foot vertical jump. Godzilla's not about that life. Godzilla's about hitting you with his tail and setting you on fire.
It would be interesting to see a fighting game where a character cannot jump, but is a legitimate fighter. Here we have another case of taking what the game did right and fine-tuning it for an imaginary sequel. The 3D environment worked, and the large arena with interactables, being the city, was great. Considering the modern interpretations of Godzilla and the eternal relevance of the series, it's not an impossible dream to talk about a sequel to a Godzilla fighting game. Maybe they could even expand the roster while they're at it. The first game had some notable omissions as playable characters, and was missing a few obscure monsters that could be added to the fight. Also, give Godzilla this move. It's what we all need in our lives. Number 1 is going to be a bit different than the other entries, since it's a crossover fighting game where part of the game is a successful fighting game franchise to this day, and the other franchise involved received a successful fighting game series after this game. We're going to suggest what some people may think is crazy, and say number 1, Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. This game was ambitious, but tried going back to its roots after the last generation of games by having more special moves that were dominant on a 2D plane, yet still having the combat on a 3D plane. It was also somewhat awkward that the character's animation felt stiff. The game added 4 big fighting mechanics, with close combat, falling combat, new test your might, and rage. The first 2 were like clashes in Injustice Now, but with 4 different gimmicks overall, it really slowed down the fighting of the game. Having just one of these mechanics could have worked, but together it was pretty convoluted. The last and probably most notable big problem fans had was that this game had a T rating, and it was a Mortal Kombat game.
Now, it's just hard to imagine a Mortal Kombat game being T-rated. I mean, this was the series, that helped develop the rating system.
This may be difficult to solve since DC Comics prefers to have a more universal T-rated video game, but looking at Injustice, that game really pushed the boundaries of a T rating, so maybe they would be willing to take a step forward. I always enjoyed the mechanics and story of Mortal Kombat, which can easily stay intact with a T rating. However, I would prefer to keep what makes Mortal Kombat unrestrained fighting and allows for maximum creative freedom on the developer's end.
And since DC movies have recently become dark and gritty, it would be easy to see how a new M-rated version of this game would just work a lot better with the current lore.
Ignoring the potential rating, the reason I feel this game could work now is NetherRealm Studios has shown how they can make successful fighting games in the modern era. While the 3D era was alright, MK vs. DC was made when their predecessor Midway was going bankrupt. After the developers formed NetherRealm Studios, I feel they really hit their stride when they switched back to a 2D plane for MK9 and future fighting games. Injustice showed us how they could make a solid DC Comics fighting game. The fact that MKX adopted interactables from Injustice and how well Scorpion's gameplay fit into the Injustice cast, I feel a crossover between the two on a 2D plane could work if NetherRealm Studios takes the time to use their best mechanics from each game and make some new gimmick that would make the game its own. There's a lot more we can go into, but we'll leave it at that. If no other franchise wants to cross over with Mortal Kombat in a unique game, we might as well make the DC partnership work. We've had more ludicrous suggestions in the past, right? So what do you think? Agree? Disagree? Are there licensed fighting games we forgot about that could use a remake? Let us know. Thank you all for watching, and here are some outtake blooper things for those of you who like post-video content. See you in the next video.
Bye!
The best blockbuster partnership were those Pokemon Snap machines, hands down.
Actually, I found a Blockbuster in Loveland, Colorado, like a couple weeks ago. It was insane. Maybe it wasn't a Blockbuster, it was just a video rental store. It was like looking at a dinosaur.
Godzilla can jump though. There was this one movie where he did this joyous leap in the air.
That'll be his taunt. Wanna know what'd be another awesome game? Mortal Kombat vs. Star Trek. Imagine the abilities. Captain Kirk could seduce everybody, Spock could have a single move counter that just automatically KOs the other person. In the storyline, Reptile and Baraka could stop being the random just get beat up characters, and they could be replaced with red shirts.
Or they could be recruited to the Star Trek crew and become red shirts.
Don't ruin this for me.